people can see and hear us. I don't know if anybody's there, but
hello, people.
It says there's.
Hear me sharpen pencils.
It says there's 2 people, but one of them is me and one of them is Eric. So.
Yes. So.
Well, that'll get. I mean, we're a little bit early, which is fine. But I figured we can have the conversation with the stream running of what we're going to read next, making that decision before we start recording.
I intend to do.
So, does anybody have any particular preferences?
I do not.
Me neither.
I jotted down 2 Post-it notes worth of things that I already own, so I don't have to buy more Audible credits. Okay. But I'm open to suggestions. Some of these are ones that I've actually read, but I wouldn't mind reading again with the book club, and some of them I have not read. So we have On a Pale Horse. That's a classic, part of the Immortals series by what's his name? I feel like Eric would know this one.
The name is not familiar. On a Pale Horse, you say?
Yeah, On a Pale Horse by Piers Anthony. The Incarnations of Immortality series.
Piers Anthony.
So, I've never read Piers Anthony before. I don't have any idea what to expect other than I had a DM once that was heavily inspired by the series with things that he did to me in a campaign. So it's been on my back burner since to check out. So,
are you trying to confirm that the DM had it correct from the book, or
no? He was,
or were they cool?
He wasn't doing anything from the book. He was just inspired by it. Then I also have the Amber Enchantress, which is book 3 of the Prism Pentad, the Dark Sun series that we were reading. The Shadowed Sun, which is book 2 of the N.K. Jemisin book that we read. I thought it could be fun to read An Absolutely Remarkable Thing. So this is Hank Green's sort of modern sci-fi story. I've read it, but
remarkable.
What's that?
An
absolutely remarkable thing.
Okay.
And then there's a second book too, but it would be a change of pace for us. But I thought it would be fun, and it's very approachable. I thought Good Omens would be fun. That's the
Neil Gaiman, Terry Pratchett, and that's good.
The Gaiman Pratchett.
I like it. I mean, I've read it and I've seen the series.
I have both read it and seen the series, but then my interest was renewed a month or so ago when I heard that they're doing a second season of the series based on a story that the two of them put together but never published.
Yeah, based on notes that they have.
So I thought that could be fun.
Let's do Good Omens.
Want to do Good Omens?
Right.
Yeah, I've read it. I love it.
So we can read it again.
Yeah. It's kind of appropriate. I'm currently watching the Lucifer series on Netflix.
Oh, yeah?
So, hey.
By Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett. I've read a good amount of Neil Gaiman stuff at this point, but I don't think I've ever, other than Good Omens, I don't think I've ever read anything by Terry Pratchett before.
Did we do a Discworld book?
We have not. I've never read a Discworld book before.
I've read the Color and Magic. I read. It's on my list to watch because I was. Yes.
There we go. Okay, I have updated the script. Well, I didn't even get through my first Post-it note.
Well, it looked like we were going to go that way, especially since I was seeing Tracy smile.
Tracy
smile
perked up.
where you were mentioning Good Omens. Mm-hmm. So, like,
I had some Fafhrd and the Grey Mouser on there because I've never read any of that, and people in D&D world speak highly of it all the time. I had Felicia Day's memoir. I had some Arthurian stuff in there.
I've read her memoir.
Is it decent?
It's decent, yeah.
Well, these are all things I already have in my Audible library, so it'll be good to get some things off that list. So.
Does that reset at the beginning of the year?
Yes. Yes, it will. Well, Tracy, are you going to paint for us tonight?
I'm doing some color pencil work, so we'll see how far I get.
Nice. Very good. Shall we get started then?
Sure.
Sure.
All right.
Do I sound okay?
Yeah, you sound okay.
Awesome.
Working from the iPad and phone.
iPad and phone, and then the wireless headset. So.
Oh. Yeah, no, it sounds okay. Eric, I think you've had a haircut since we last met, or last chatted.
Oh, trying to remember. Last time that was in
It was...
would have been June, so yes.
Okay.
Because it was yeah, we've been
Yeah.
last June. Because yes, the day I went to get my second shot, I went to visit my mom,
Oh.
and she offered. It was nice outside, and she had her stuff from when I was a teen.
There you go.
So,
Did your second shot
Yes.
affect you at all?
I had lots of energy.
Oh. That is like
So-
the opposite of the reaction I had. So-
Yeah, I had lots of energy. In fact, usually at night, I go to sleep like that, and Brian, when the stars are right and she has done the proper sacrifice, she falls asleep. Type situation. That night, she felt like that, and I was in the middle of the night,
Oh, wow.
wide open and full of energy and all that. So I messaged her while she was sleeping and basically told her,
Yeah.
that's how you feel.
Well, I mean, if that's the reaction you get from the second shot, that's not too bad at all. It
Oh, no,
knocked
it
me
wasn't
on my
bad.
butt
I
for
was
like the weekend. I got my shot on Friday, and I
Yeah.
felt pretty horrible on Saturday. But then by Sunday, I was feeling better, and then by the end of the day, Sunday, it was back like it was no big deal.
Yep. Here in Ontario, we're going to start with having a vaccine passport for entering places like theaters,
Oh.
restaurants, and all that. So
Is that a city ordinance or province?
province.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
equivalent to your state.
I know what a province
Different?
is. I'm a social studies person.
That is true.
All right. Well, let me figure out if I actually. Oh, there's the recording software. Oh.
Are we talking about hockey again?
We can. What do you want to say about hockey?
It's
Most
kind of
of
his favorite pastime.
most of my knowledge of hockey is from the movie Miracle. So don't ask me too much.
Oh. Ugh.
All right, now I've got my recording software ready to go. Luckily, I opened it and suddenly it's like, hey, there's an update. You need to run this. Oh, I hope that didn't take very long. But it was quick, so we're good now.
Excellent.
Trace, you ready?
Yes.
Let me hit record. The audio is recording. One of you say something?
Say
Hello.
something.
Yep. Perfect. It's ready to go.
This episode of The Tome Show is brought to you by our patrons. Support the show over at patreon.com/The Tome Show. Welcome to the Tome Book Club for August of 2021. The Tome is a D&D news, reviews, and interview show, and I'm your Tome host, Tracy Hurley.
And I'm Jeff Greiner. In each book club episode, we discuss one D&D-ish related book. Spoilers be damned, in full book club style. And our book this time around is Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tome.
And with us, as always, is Eric Paquette.
Hello, bonjour.
And the next episode, which we'll record towards the end of October, hopefully, we'll be reading Good Omens, which is great right before Halloween, by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett.
Or if our timing is like it was this time, this is our August episode that we're recording. What is today? September 1st, 2nd? It could be right after Halloween. Who knows?
Also appropriate.
Yeah, there you go. So before we get started, I want to say thank you to all of our patrons that help us pay the bills. You can help out too by joining at patreon.com/The Tome Show and offering as little as $1 a month. You can join such illustrious patrons as Doug Palmer, Gene Crane, Hyperlexic, James D'Alessio, Jester David, Jill Sanders, Leonard Pelche, Michael Harrison, Andrew Avery, Carl Anderson, Derek Heath, Frank Williams, Jeff Matthews, Catherine Cower Banks, and others. And that list is getting long, and that's a good thing. I enjoy a lot of those are new patrons, and some of those are patrons at a higher rate that get mentioned at least once a month. I try. So, let's talk about this book, Children of Virtue and Vengeance by Tome Adeyemi, who I discovered does not have a Twitter account because I tried to tag the author in posts. This is the second book in the what's it called, the Orisha series? Is that right?
I believe the Blood of Orisha.
Blood of Orisha. So we read the first book a while ago. It was getting sort of rave reviews and getting a lot of attention, and we decided, hey, we should check this out too, and we did. And it presented a different take than your traditional fantasy in that it wasn't Eurocentric, it was Afrocentric in its approach to looking at fantasy. The first book was about a young girl who, along with her friends and sometimes enemy, went through a long process of bringing magic back to the kingdom. Right, magic had been sort of wiped out by decree of the throne. And it was just sort of all stamped out, and there was no magic really in the world, or at least in the kingdom anymore. At the end of the first book, magic comes back. And so this book is largely, I guess, dealing with the aftermath of that, right? The first book very easily could have been a standalone book, one and done. But this book is like, yeah, but just because we brought magic back doesn't mean the story's over. How does that all come together? What happens to the kingdom now? What happens to the people now that magic is back?
Well, not just the people, but also the fact that he killed off the king. Mm-hmm. That was being a tyrant in the first book. So,
well, killed off the king, and I think we thought also killed off the prince who was next in line for the throne.
Yes. Although
it turned out that was not the case, right? As we discover in this book, the prince survived. When Amari, who is the princess, right, the next in line after her brother Inan, basically shows up in the capital, makes a declaration that she's taking the throne and ending the war against the magi, the magic users of the world, and it's all going to be peace and unity and good times and rainbows and kittens from now on, at which point her mother shows up, starts wreaking havoc and slaughtering people with all kinds of powerful magic as she drains the life force out of her soldiers to power that magic. And then later on, after mom chased off her daughter, the princess, we discover that Inan, the prince, actually survived and is now being put on the throne as the new king.
Yeah, and I think there's a bit more there in terms of, in the first book, what we found out was, particularly the royalty had been anti-magic users for various reasons. There's this ongoing struggle between people, like largely the royal folks and the magi or the magic users, that ended up with this slaughter that happened back when Zélie was little, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's this ongoing feud, or more to the point, nobody in living memory has ever had peace, like true
Right.
peace, it feels like. And so, but it then turns out that a bunch of the folks that helped protect the royalty and some of the royalty themselves had magic use in their veins as well, because that was the big thing from Anon, from the first book. But the hard part is this book really requires you, I think, to have at least a bit more knowledge from that first book than we've often seen in second books and trilogies.
Yeah, no, it took me probably 4 or 5 chapters into this book before I even remembered the broad strokes of like who these characters were and what I'm supposed to know. Oh, Anon's the prince. Oh yeah, and he was kind of outcast and hiding because from his own family because he had magic. And oh yeah, Amari was his sister who had run away at the beginning of the first. Like it took me a good while to even remember who the characters were, and I was still remembering things from the first book, well into the second book as they made reference to it. I'm like, oh yeah, no, that's a thing. I suppose I completely forgot about that because it's been so long since we read the first book.
Right, because I think the first few chapters, because it's been about a month or so since I've listened to it, focused on Zélie and the loss of her father.
Yes, Baba.
Baba, yeah, and he died in part because the ritual she tried to do went awry, and it created this weird situation when magic came back, how it came back, and everything.
Yeah, I guess I still don't remember that. So I knew she was sort of despondent over the loss of her father for a good chunk, and it comes up throughout the book.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, and they spend, so that happened where mom comes back and turns out she's got access to this like blood magic thing where she drains the life of other people into very powerful magics, which it's weird. And maybe this is something I'm not exactly remembering between the first book and the second. Maybe somebody else remembers, but the royal family has access to a type of magic, and yet hates magic users and has gone to war with their own people to destroy all magic users.
From what I recall, one of the reasons why they were against magic users because beforehand they remember a time where the magic users were ruling and were causing trouble, and thus there was a revolt, from what I recall. Well, I could be mistaken with another series too, but and that's what caused a shift for anti-magi. There was still magic there, but they were all like really reduced in power. And the ritual that Zélie did at the end of the first book released all the magic.
And I think part of it too is I remember from the first book reading explanations, and I think it's even at the end of the first book, talking about why the book was written, and a large part of it was really trying to deal with particularly the experience of Black people in the U.S. and the ongoing oppression and struggles that they've had, and that sort of police state that has come down onto them. So I think that's one of the layers where I really like the story, and I do like that it's tackling that sort of like, how do you go forward when you've had that history? But it's a little hard at points to then see it as its own history and story that's separated out from that. Like it felt like a really good exploration of how do you move forward. But it made the most sense to me and felt strongest when I was just using that as a way of exploring that idea.
Yeah, that's a good point, because I remember there was like an appendix or whatever in the first book, or an essay or something at the end, sort of describing that inspiration. I had forgotten about that, and so I was taking in this book at face value, so to speak, as sort of its own setting and what have you. And there are places where it feels strange that like you're anti-magic except for the magic you use, but if you're doing it as an allegory for systemic oppression, then there's a degree to where that makes some sense, right? Oppressors allow themselves to do things that they don't allow the oppressed to do, so to speak, you know?
Right.
Although it's a different kind of magic, right? The Magi, they almost have like schools of magic. They're different sort of bloodlines with specialties, you know? There's the burners that are good with fire, and the titers that are good with water stuff, and that kind of stuff, right? Whereas the royal family and the guards, I guess, that they employ, the soldiers that they employ, have this sort of other kind of magic that doesn't necessarily fit into any of those categories. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, and I think part of it was that this idea that the reason why the queen was so powerful is she had somehow combined two different types of magic.
Oh.
I know, because at the end they were trying to figure a way that they could combine two people who had different types to create like this super powerful.
Yeah, I mean that's a big theme for the second half of the book in terms of how the Magi are going to win, is that they figure out that if they connect them to each other, that they can combine their magics, and it's, you know, ultra powerful or whatever, but it has the downside of somebody has to be sacrificed or all the people that are connected will die.
Right. And I guess in my mind, I kind of connected that to being what the queen was also doing, because she was just killing people left and right.
I suppose. Yeah, that makes sense. But she was drawing on their life force and killing her own guards or whatever to use their magic to do all kinds of crazy powerful things. So yeah, no, I hadn't picked up on that, but I bet that is what's going on. I think you're right.
And there was also, like, we got revelations about that big massacre that had led to the outlawing of the Magi, and I can't remember the details anymore, other than her nephew felt very betrayed, because I guess his parents didn't necessarily even have to die.
Right.
And wanted to then seek revenge against...
Well, and it was like the official story was always that they blamed the Magi, specifically a group of burners, for attacking the king and killing a bunch of people, including I forget his name, but the nephew's parents, and he was scarred or something in the process, and what have you, right? And then it was discovered by Anon, the prince now king, that in fact, it was his mother that sort of manipulated and set things up so that would happen, because she wanted to continue the war against the Magi. She wanted to win, not compromise and unify with.
Right.
So the real hatred for the Magi that kept everything going at that point was the mom. Now, although it's worth notice, I notice as I read it that each of our main characters kind of played that role at different points in the story. Every single character, like, there was a moment when they could have resolved things peacefully, and one of the characters was angry and not listening to what was going on, or not trusting people or whatever, and screwed it up and made sure that the violence continued. Like, over and over and over again, you are reminded these are very young people who are, like, sometimes I read a book and I'm like, man, why can't people just be remotely competent and have the wisdom of experience or whatever? And then I remember, because they don't have the wisdom of experience, right? They were like teenagers or whatever when this all started.
Yeah.
So it makes sense that they get caught up in things and they make poor decisions or whatever. And the timing is such that one of them is always making a poor decision just at the right moment to screw everything up.
And I think that's why at the beginning I wanted to be able to point out that they had never lived with good role models completely, right? Like, there has been this ongoing, and one side has definitely had more authoritative power for a long time, at least in terms of everyone living in the book.
Right.
But they have not had the best of role models in terms of how to actually function as a society together.
Yeah, no, and the timing, maybe it's because it's been so long since I've read the first book, but the timing confused me a little bit. Because we talked about how the people, the young people that are, coming up and running things and whatever now, have never had an example to draw on of what peace could look like in the kingdom, right? Where the Magi are not being oppressed or whatever. But at the same time, there was a moment when Zele had there was this like peaceful moment, and she was like reminded, mentioned about how it felt like it reminded me of when my mother used to use magic. And that confused me, because if she's never had if magic has been gone for her whole life, then when has mom ever used magic? I forget how that worked, or what the timing was.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Eric.
Yeah, well, like I said, from what I recall, there was some instances of magic in the previous world, but it was a restraint. The ritual in the first book was to release magic upon the world.
Okay.
So there was always and the Magi were treated as second classes and as servants and stuff like that.
Okay.
Because you remember, Amari had in the first book, Amari had a servant that was bad, and that caused her to run away because she got in trouble, and
right.
That started her path.
Okay, yeah, now I'm remembering that. So even though magic was gone, it wasn't completely gone. It was just sort of tamped down and oppressed.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the release those, and now so that's why possibly that situation right now where by releasing the magic upon the world, that's in the Frida's book, it also engages. That's why the queen and the guards now have that magic.
Okay, and that makes that helps me make some sense of some other things, like the nephew / cousin, Anon's cousin. It is revealed towards the end of the book that he is actually a magi this whole time, and has the kind of, what are they called, like the welders or whatever, that have the power to like manipulate metal. And he seemed quite accomplished at that, for somebody who has been hiding his magic and has only theoretically had it for, at this point, a few months, a year maybe, since magic came back. But if he's possibly had it his whole life and has just been sort of hiding it, there may have been more opportunity for him to practice it and learn how to use it. So I have I have other things I want to talk about, but we should talk about where the book goes. So after the sort of announcement of Amari taking over the throne is disrupted by the queen, they basically run off and to hide and end up in the ruins of an old Magi temple, where they find a character who I assume from the way they were greeted we met in the first book, and then I forgot about, an old lady who remembered magic or whatever, who had been gathering up all the Magi, the new Magi, there at these temples. And they were training and practicing and learning and also organizing like the resistance to the monarchy.
Well, from what I recall, the first book, she was a resistance leader.
Okay.
In the first book, that helped out them to get where to go to release the magic.
Okay.
So.
Well, because is this the same temple they went to when they got the Sunstone? No, that's the one they went to later when they were going after the scrolls. That was a thing. They mentioned, so they hook up with the resistance of Magi who are practicing, and there continues to be lots of drama between Amari wanting to seek out a peaceful solution with her, now they realize, alive brother Anon, who's the king, and Zele insisting there's no way you can trust anything he says. He's betrayed us at every important moment. He's only trustworthy when it's easy for him to be, but as soon as it's not, he betrays us. And at one point, and there's a handful of conflicts here and there, and then at one point they decide we need more power, we need more magic, and there's this other temple, which is where Zele got the sunstone that allowed for the ritual that released magic, where she's like, oh, I saw a whole bunch of scrolls there where we can learn more magic. And so they're going to break in, or they're going to go back to this temple. It turns out to be a break-in because the kingdom has found out that they're going to be there, and they've laid guards and Anons there with the mom and the soldiers there and whatever. So they just sort of end up breaking in, grabbing as many scrolls as they can, and getting out while confronting Anon along the way. And then they learn a whole bunch of new magic. We do a training montage for a while we continue to have conflicts back and forth between the main characters. The one character that seems above of the four sort of main characters, the one character that seems above it all is also the only one that doesn't get a point of view ever in the story, and that's Zane. He's pretty consistent, right? But he's also a non-magi and sort of defaults to the others. Amari and Zele both become elders within the magi, and of course Anon's the king.
Well, and it's interesting to talk about how Amari becomes an elder, because there's this whole thing where there's only one elder for each type of magic, mm-hmm. right? And typically, so the way Zele it gets there is the person steps aside that had been the elder for that type of magic and says, well, of course you're going to be our elder now, right? But when Amari doesn't have a seat, people are distrustful of her, but she feels that she should be leading them because they are her people too, and so she challenges the other one. In which
it's not just that she feels like they're her people too, it's because she wants to seek a peaceful solution. She wants to try to work out a deal with Anon, and nobody will listen to her. And so she's like, if I am one of the elders, they'll have to listen.
Yes. But one way of also looking at it is she feels she has a right to be there and to have her voice of peace heard, because she sees herself as, had Anon not appeared, had her mom not done that thing, she would already be the leader of everyone. And so she does that challenge, which and then expects people to just respect her afterwards, even though it's a challenge where you're actually supposed to potentially go to the death, right? Mm-hmm. Or at least severe maiming. And it went there.
Right.
And then is suddenly like, well, of course now you're going to listen to me because now I have authority and power. Mm-hmm. And it didn't go well.
No, yeah. It turned out just because you're an elder doesn't mean anybody listens or respects you, right?
Right.
Yeah. And people were kind of actually afraid of her at that point because she won, but she basically won by putting the other person in a coma because she completely lost control of her magic. And what's more, the way she defeated her opponent was she used an incantation that Zele taught her, but Zele taught her the incantation on the promise that she would never use it against a magi. And of course, the first time she uses it is against a magi.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, they both become elders, but at the same time, like we talk about how but just because she was an elder, nobody would pay attention to Amari. But everybody paid a lot of attention to Zele. But that, as we approach the sort of the end game of the story, actually starts to switch. Zele sort of becomes despondent. There was an attack, and her second is killed, and she becomes unreachable. Sort of, she decides this isn't worth it. It's time to leave. We should just leave the Orisha. We should leave the kingdom and go somewhere else, and that'll also end this whole thing. And a lot fewer people have to die, right? And the rest of the Magi are not hearing that. And at that point, Amari is like, oh, because it all happened because she arranged to meet with her brother to try to broker some sort of peace. And his mom followed with the army and launched an attack that he didn't know about. But Amari's like, oh, I guess Zele was right. He can't be trusted. The only way to end this is by winning. And so they kind of switched roles. Zele becomes the one that's more passive that nobody listens to, but Amari becomes the aggressor and starts planning the attack, and everybody's on board with Amari all of a sudden.
Well, because they want to win.
Well, because they also want to. They also want to be aggressive at attack, right?
Yeah. So,
but that's what I was saying earlier, is that each of them has an opportunity to try to do things and find a peaceful solution, and at some point, at least one of them is in a position where they're not willing to do what needs to be done to find a peaceful solution. And it is a... Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, there's always the bigger question, is there a peaceful solution?
Well... yes, but it involves tearing down the systems of oppression that created the whole situation, which ultimately, when Anon figured out that his mom was responsible for manipulating the whole war into existence, he was on board with that. Like, he drugged his own mother so she couldn't stop him, and then went out and made an announcement that he was disbanding the throne. He was ending the monarchy. Of course,
yep.
Which is him doing things that might have led to a peaceful solution, but at that point, Amari was not going to have it, right? So it was all going down from, and Amari at that point got real aggressive. Like, she figured out, well, my mother, and she believed her brother, although that's largely because in dramatic stories people don't talk to each other, otherwise they wouldn't be dramatic. She decided my mother is basically going to do whatever it takes. I need to be willing to do whatever it takes too. And so she works out a sort of secret plan just amongst a few core people from the elders of, we're basically going to nuke this whole town to death and slaughter everybody, because it will also catch the monarchy, my brother and my mother, in the death, and we'll be finally done with this whole thing. Which, of course, when she implements that plan, which at the time she didn't even know that Zele could have possibly been in the middle of it, right? She was willing to sacrifice her if necessary to end the whole thing. That turned out to be a line in the sand that turned everybody against her again, right? She spends the rest of the story in shackles. Zele's upset with her, and Zane, who was her love interest, is done with her now. All the elders are finished that she was willing to sacrifice all those people to get that done. Especially because it wasn't just a town, it was Zele's and Zane's hometown. Tracy looks like she wants to say something.
I was just going to say, and the kicker is...
that they didn't even get him? Right. All right. The mother and brother were Anon and the mother, whose name escapes me, were gone when it all went down. But also, in the end, nobody died. Or they did, but they got to come back because Zele had done a little practicing in combining her life force basically with somebody else, with her new love interest, Rowan, the mercenary, who's kind of, I don't know, he's kind of the Han Solo of the story, I think. At least that's what he became in my head. But also became her love interest through the process, which is always weird because she had a previous love interest that was Anon, who's now the king. And even when they see each other, there's still like a will they, won't they kind of thing going on, right? But Rowan was dying, and she connected her life energy to him to keep him alive, but then they were both dying, and so they just sort of kept connecting other people to this web of connected life energies to sustain each other. And in the process, those of them who were magi started combining their magic, and they discovered that when her magic, which is, she's a reaper, so she has like power over death and spirits and that kind of stuff, combined with a healer, they were able to bring people back from the dead. And unlike D&D, there's no spell slots. They just raised every single person in the town who died.
As one
Everybody lives. Or
Right.
comes back.
Everybody lives, except, of course, eventually, we understand that that connection is going to kill everybody who's connected, or they have to pick somebody to sacrifice, somebody that they're going to kill to keep everybody else alive. And there was an idea. Azalea was like, well, maybe Amari's the one. She's the one that did all this. She's beyond redemption. Maybe we connect with her and then use her as the sacrifice to keep everybody else alive, to end the connection. And Amari was totally on board. And just as Amari was like, yeah, you're right. This is my only path to redemption. I'll totally do it. Zaylee was like, well, no. I haven't made the decision yet. Never mind. No, we're not doing it.
You like this ain't too much.
Right?
No, we're not doing it.
Yeah, you're entirely too agreeable. So no, the answer is no now. And then they scaled an assault on wherever it was. The Anon and the mother were off holed up. I don't remember if it was like the palace or whatever. I think it might have been, because I think there was comment of, oh, this is where I killed my father, sort of mentions here and there. Which actually went really fast. Like, there was this initial sort of assault with the army on the outside, and then the next time we caught up with what was going on, they were already inside and separated and fighting their individual fights, right? Amari was taking on her mother, as I recall. Zaylee confronts Anon at the end. He's like, I'm trying to do right. I'm dismantling the monarchy. But if killing me is what it takes, do it, and then just as she was about to, what is it? Like some gas fills the room. Everything goes white. And then we wake up in the epilogue and they're all there together and prisoners. And that's where the book ends, right?
And the ship is somewhere.
Right.
So.
Which, of course, is clearly saying, come read book 3, right?
Yeah.
Which I haven't had a chance to look. I literally finished the book today, so I haven't had a chance to look if we know when book 3 is being released.
Let's see.
thought I saw something about this year, but I'm not sure.
So it's a Legacy of Arusha.
Legacy of Arusha. So
the next book is untitled so far.
okay.
It's a good read, so
Does it have a release date yet?
no release date on the good
Okay.
read, so
Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
I mean, we waited several years in between the first one and this one, so I guess we can wait again,
Yeah.
right? Now, it's interesting in some ways, as I thought about this specifically in terms of the book club, I oftentimes think about that sort of last question about how does this connect to, how would this be of interest maybe to D&D players, right? And one of the things that, well, first of all, in many ways, this book doesn't translate really well to a D&D campaign, right? Because it's mostly about the drama between these two, these 3/4/5 people, right? And the back and forth and what have you, which doesn't necessarily translate really well to D&D.
I think the closest setting that you can get for the dynamics of oppression of people with magic and with different type of magic and all that would be Dark Sun, because you have
Sure.
the Sorcerer Kings and the Templars who have their own magic, and you have the Preservers and the Clerics that have their own magic, and so you can sort of, and there's lots of oppression in the Dark Sun setting, so you could touch some same themes that you see in this book.
Right. It did occur to me as I was reading it, because I was reading this and simultaneously preparing to run a Fantasy Age game for my group, and it occurred to me that Fantasy Age, in many ways, could be an ideal system for running at least the in many ways the the heroes, the magic system would fit really well. I could definitely see sort of what Fantasy Age calls the Arcana that covers, burners and whatever. And the scrolls are, here's an expansion, so now there's more spell options, or and where exhaustion is the magic point system. And as I go through, like Fantasy Age classically only has 3 classes: the warrior, the rogue, and the mage. And as I think about every character in the story, every single one of them sort of fits into one of those 3 categories pretty well. I think Fantasy Age would if you wanted to do an Orisha setting, Fantasy Age would do it well. But the one thing, as much as the story, the narrative, I think the first book would translate decently well into a D&D story, right? You gather a party together, you go on this mission to bring magic back, you perform a ritual, there's lots of conflict along the way, and a lot of it's physical conflict, and in the end you cast the ritual and kill the king, right? Which actually feels very Dark Sun-ish, now that I say it. But this book is a lot of like relationship back and forth. Can we trust him? We can't trust him, and then they switch sides on the thing. We should run away. No, we should attack.
I've run a Dark Sun campaign that took place after the first book in Tyr, when Tyr is freed and all that, and there's all the chaos. So there's politics, there's intrigue and all that.
Free. As much as a society can be free that still has slaves, but yes.
Yeah. Well, no,
I guess
it actually becomes no.
That's right. They do become a no slave.
So
not that there's not still oppressed, but yes, I get the point.
Yeah. So and I brought in stuff, other stuff that Kalak had brought in the past that had set up as plans and all that. So you can do it in Dark Sun, based on this book about basically a civil war that is conflict between the nobility and the people and stuff like that, because there's a power vacuum that happens. Basically.
I could even see in Dark Sun, because there are ruins that are remnants of the world before, when there was still plant life and all that you could totally see that as being like the temple where the Magi are hiding out. And I could definitely see that. The one thing that when I really reflected on it though, that felt a lot like a D&D campaign to me was the power growth of the characters, right? Like D&D has a tendency, I don't know, when I run D&D campaigns, I feel like the characters in my campaigns grow in power way faster than anything in any books I've ever read, or and definitely way faster than anybody else in the world, right? You're a wizard that may have been studying magic for 532 years, but I've been adventuring for 6 months, and I'm now able to cast the same spells you are, But that felt like what was going. Like we have, magic has only been back in the world for months, and now we're flying and we're learning new spells. We got scrolls, and we're able. By the end, we're throwing earthquakes and destroying armies. The power growth was huge for these people who had never used magic before.
Well, you study history, you know that in wars, progress goes quickly as we try to get new stuff, new weapons, new things to be able to do stuff.
But also lots of experience points because of so many monsters dying.
Well, we start putting radioactive paint on our watches, and
exactly. But yes, no.
Yeah, that was the one part of this book that I'm like, oh, that's very D&D-ish. Like these folks all ramped up in power really fast, and that feels like D&D adventurers.
Yeah, the thing that you would have to put in a bit to make it feel is because you see, yes, they go in house, but there's cost to that magic. This is not just because in D&D, other than you spend a spell slot, there's no actual real big huge cost. There's no, oh, look, we save everyone's life, but someone's going to need to be sacrificed.
Well, yes. That's why I thought, like, Fantasy Age doesn't do that, obviously. And most of their magic doesn't do that. Like most of their spells, they can cast, and you don't have to sacrifice.
Yeah.
It's only when you combine the spells. But you could definitely combine your magic to get a power boost sort of spell system, put that in place, and then have the sacrifice sort of requirements or whatever as part of it.
For the high level powers, because in Dark Sun there is the 10th level magic.
Oh, right.
Well,
there was, like in second edition, right?
Second edition, yes. Which was a combination of magic and psionics. But many of those also required lots of sacrifice, because in Dark Sun, there's plant life sacrifice, and that 10th level is living life sacrifices. So,
but I could totally see a Fantasy Age Arcana that was like, hey, here are spells that you can only access when you when you take two people that have access to both of these Arcana, or then now you can cast Resurrection, and you can cast it as many times as you have magic points for. But when you're done, someone's gonna die, right? You can bring 15 people back to life, but you still have to sacrifice somebody to bring those 15 people back, right? Which is very different than D&D, where it's just, well, if I can spend the money, get the components, cast the spell, then I can bring people back from the dead. But this idea that we can bring people back from the dead, but there's a sacrifice to it, is interesting to me.
And that does call back to like older versions of D&D, with the components being more of the components themselves were intended to be part of the economy of spells.
Mm-hmm. It occurred to me too that because I read the quick start, because that RPG is not out yet. In fact, the Kickstarter ends today as we speak.
The Avatar?
Avatar Legends. I read a quick start, and that can do more of the personal character-based story. Because the journey that you see in the Avatar series has some sort of links with the Orisha tale too.
Right. Especially in as much as like the Avatar series is very much magic, if you will, is very elemental based. And while the schools of magic in Orisha are not elemental based, some of them are, right? There's definitely, people who are good with fire and water and whatever, but then there's also metal and death and healing and whatever.
So like from reading a quick start, I could see, and there might be more when the game comes out next year, but that could be an option.
Can we just take a moment to acknowledge over $9 million?
Yes.
For that Kickstarter?
Kickstarter.
Yes.
Yeah. It's.
I wasn't sure about, to take a bit of a tangent, I was contemplating backing that, and I wasn't sure about backing it, and then I had caught word that Magpie Games, who's doing it, has a history of relationships with a certain member of the gaming community that perhaps should not be named, and is particularly the type of member of the community that the community doesn't need, I guess is a way to say it, right? And so I guess that was what sealed it for me. It's like, oh, okay, well, I've got enough games, and I literally just backed like 3 other things. I don't really need to get into this. So
I backed it because I know some of the creators on it, like Daniel Kwan from Asian Represents, is one of the contributing designers on it, and there's several Asian origin, Asian heritage folks that are working on this. Also,
that's good that they have Asian representation in the creator base for a story and a setting that is clearly inspired by Asian culture.
But yes, there is. But yeah, right now it's like at 9.5 million. So it's an 81,000 backers. So there's a large community.
Yeah.
So
Children of Virtue and Vengeance, though, is the topic of conversation here. Any other sort of thoughts or connections or Anything else that anybody wanted to say about this book?
Didn't quite feel like there was much really development for the characters. It seemed to where they were at the start and where they are at the end, their characters are pretty much the same. I found.
I mean, their positions changed, but I could see where you could say their development as people was still pretty much where it was, right?
Yeah.
They didn't really learn anything in the process. They just sort of changed their minds about things.
Yeah. So.
Like, except maybe Anon. One could argue that Anon maybe learned a little something along the way.
Yeah.
He learned that his family was never trustworthy and that maybe we need to give the power to the people, and that's a fairly significant... That's more than just a change in opinion.
Yeah. You just had trouble expressing that.
Although, in fairness, he kind of wanted to do that at the beginning too. So maybe not. Maybe he kind of came full circle. He wanted to unite the people, and then he was manipulated by Mom, and things went poorly, and he didn't. And then he kind of came back around to, no, we're going to do it, and even if it means sacrificing what we know of in this country and moving on.
Yeah.
Interesting. Yeah. So I'll be curious to see, because as I was reading this book, I'm like, oh, so this is where it's going. This is how it's going to end. And I don't know that a third book is needed, but then obviously it ends on a cliffhanger, and it didn't do all of the things I thought. I honestly had thought Anon was going to end up killing his mother. Which he didn't. He poisoned his mother and sort of got her out of the way, but she seemed to get over that poison way faster than he expected, because she popped up not too long afterwards. And then, of course, they all ended up being captured and taken prisoner by who knows who, going who knows where. Are we going to discover there's some sort of other greater power in the world, and we're going to see what is out there beyond the kingdom of Orisha, or I don't know.
Or they being sent to a new place to start anew from fresh.
Or the nobles were arranged for all of this because they didn't like the idea of destroying the monarchy.
Yeah.
Who knows? I guess we'll find out someday when the third book comes out. So. Yeah. But when that happens, I might have to go back and re-listen to both the first and second book, because clearly the author is not going to, based on the second book, the author is not going to help me remind me and catch me back up.
I did find when it's supposed to be out. They are saying sometime in 2021. So
sometime this year. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, we might have to look at it early next year then.
Yep. Because the one version of Vengeance came out, I believe, December of last year, so maybe the same thing.
Okay. All right. Any other sort of thoughts or additional things you want to talk about?
Not sure. I liked it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I do see the struggle in trying to bring it into campaigns, like outside. Because I do think it could be a cool setup, but you'd have to have a group that wanted to do more of that intrigue and...
it's more of relationship stuff than intrigue, right? You got to really dig into the role-playing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Another setting that might work, but I'm not too sure how well, Brandes would be the person to speak to see if it worked, would be Birthright, because it does have domains, they have areas with power and all that. So.
Yeah, and even, I'm thinking too, because we didn't talk about Rowan too much.
We didn't.
But he ends up turning his back on his crew, right? In order to help them.
Yeah.
And then you're bringing up, like, who knows who kidnapped them, and...
Oh, yeah.
There are people paying those guys.
Could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
And that's going to piss Rowan off something fierce. Because like, he almost killed the guy that was basically taking over for him and leading the mutiny. And he's like, "Look, I'm going to leave you alive, but you got to go away and leave me alone and never come back. And if you don't, I think he said literally, I will hang you by your own innards." Because Rowan has a violent streak when he's not dealing with Zele. So, which still feels a little bit like the Han Solo of the story to me, right? He was the scoundrel, connected to gangsters or whatever, who then joins the rebellion and largely does it for a girl.
Well, it reminds me of Lucan and oh God, what's her name? The tiefling.
Hablar or
Farida.
Rita, yeah.
Yep.
I could see that.
Yep.
So yeah. Well, I'll be curious to see where the book goes. The story goes in the third book, because I thought it was all wrapping up with a nice, neat bow on it, and it really didn't. It did the classic sort of sequel, right? The first story in a series could stand alone because they don't know if they're going to get a contract to do more books or more movies or whatever it is. The second one very intentionally is left on a cliffhanger, and on kind of a down note because they already know they're going to get to do a third installment. So, and also I think it's also pretty classic for a second story to oftentimes be less well received because the first installment of a story is presenting something unique that you haven't seen before. And the second one can't do that because it's the same setting, so it's not as unique and not as novel, and so it has to stand in different ways.
Yeah.
I was just really hoping that we'd find a way forward. So maybe we will in the third book.
Find a way forward?
That's the type... Yeah.
Like a peaceful way forward? Or the one side just wins?
I don't know. Because again, going back to like what inspired the story to be written, it's super hard to know what would fix it in our world.
Right. Yeah.
So I'm just looking for, and I mean, I hope it's not that a non-violent. I hope it's a non-violent way, not a violent way. I was really hoping the book could have ideas for what that could look like, and I think there's a glimmer of some of them in those resistance groups.
Well, I think there was a glimmer of in Anon as well. Like Anon is the oppressor who's trying to dismantle the systems of oppression. The system's not letting him do it, but he's trying to dismantle the systems of oppression as the leader of that system.
Right. So I'm really hoping.
But of course, the oppressed don't trust that he's actually doing it for very good reasons, because he has, intentionally or not, betrayed them many, many times before. So.
Right, and so you got to decide what you want over time, and it's nice to be able to make that decision with a book, and then try to figure out how to apply it to your own life, even if it's a fiction book.
Right on. Well, is it time to call this the end of the episode? All right.
Sure.
Yeah.
Then we will call this the end of the episode. It is time to say goodbye. I want to say thank you to all of our patrons over at patreon.com/thetomeshow and hope that you might consider popping over and joining us.
And if you'd like to contact us, you can send us an email at thetomeshow@gmail.com. You can find me, Tracy, at Sarah Dark Magic on Twitter. That's Sarah with an H, and SarahDarkMagic.com. You can find Jeff at Squatch, SQUACH. You can find Eric at Eric MPAC, ERICMPAQ. The show is at The Tome Show, and you can find us on Facebook, Patreon, Discord, lots of places, Twitch, YouTube. Watch us live as we record on twitch.tv/Tome Show, or watch the video afterward on the Tome Show's YouTube channel. Show notes and other great shows are at thetomeshow.com.
And that is our thoughts on Children of Virtue and Vengeance. Up next, around the end of October, we are going to discuss Good Omens by Neil Gaiman and Terry Pratchett, the book that inspired the Amazon Prime series. I'm sure we could get Mr. Gaiman and Pratchett to pop on and talk to us about it too, right? Or maybe David Tennant will come and
Pratchett's a bit long distance.
These are not people I anticipate being able to get interviews with, but I've seen Gaiman be real responsive to fans on Twitter. Maybe if we ask, he'll come on. Probably not. All right, so that's the end of this episode. Until we get to Good Omens, then I'm going to tell you to keep turning the page, Tomites. The end.
This is as far as I got because colored pencils are slow.
V for Vampire?
I'm thinking it's the ABCs of RPGs activity.
With his cloak, it evokes me of vampire.
That's what I was thinking too.
Right on. Well, I think we had the whole time one viewer who was not us, so we will say goodbye to them.
Goodbye.
Hi, viewer.
And I will end the stream as well as soon as I find OBS.
Yep.
There it is.